God, it says.
Hold your profanity till later. Tweet this thing out. All right. Hello, Hawkeye fans. Welcome to the Hawkeye Hotspot podcast. I am Rob Howe. That other person you are seeing, if you are on our YouTube stream, is Scott Docterman from The Athletic. You'll hear his voice in a couple seconds here. It is Thursday, November the 2nd, 2023, about 9:15 a.m. Central Time. Not much to talk about this week in Hawkeye country. So let's start with how was Halloween, Scott? Did you have a lot of trick-or-treaters?
Not hardly any. I think the weather really kept people away. It was nasty, wasn't it? I mean, the wind and then the cold, and my family did a great job of setting up a bunch of stuff outside. They did some paper mache. They had like from Charlie Brown, the Lucy sign, psychiatric help, and dressed up, and then hardly anybody showed up because it was just so cold. Yeah, but more candy for me, right?
Yeah, we had leftover candy. I don't ever remember that happening, but we got good stuff. We got the Reese's and the Kit Kats and the Twix, and I'll give the kids credit. I have hope for the future. They dug all that out and left the Three Musketeers and the Milky Ways. And our youngest is like, hey, they took all the Reese's. Meanwhile, she's got a giant bag of candy that she acquired by going with her friend trick-or-treating. So, it came and went. It was very cold. We're supposed to get a little bit warmer weather for high school football playoffs tomorrow night around the state quarterfinals. Tomorrow night's a big one, Scott, right to go to the Dome. You win, you go to the Dome. You lose, your season's over. These are maybe some of the most pressure-packed high school football games in the state are this week.
Yeah, for sure. And this was the round that I got beat in my senior year. So, and we played pretty good.
Probably still bugs you.
Oh yeah, absolutely it does. No question. It's 32 years ago now, but it's still something that you think about, especially this time of year. You think about it every day, and it's still tough, but you cope and you move on, of course, but it's something that sticks with you, and you just know how precious these moments are, and you realize it in the moment, but it really sticks to you usually the next fall and next playoffs. And in our case, we had beaten that team in the regular season, but then they beat us in the playoffs. So that was Bettendorf with Tavian Banks. So they're a pretty good team.
Yeah, not bad.
Yeah.
Moving on and focusing on what the task at hand and what's going on is kind of the theme this week around here in Hawkeye circles. It was a strange Halloween Kirk Ferentz press conference. I was not there. Scott was. I watched it. It was, and I've been around the man for 25 years, and there haven't been many times where I've seen him that, I don't know what you want, rattled, shaken, off his game, a little sideways, and tip of the cap to Fran McCaffrey with the sideways. Yeah. Scott, this has been one of the more unusual weeks for me, being around Iowa football. It's just, I didn't think I would see what I'm seeing this week.
From hearing the rumblings, being notified basically on Sunday that something was coming down the pipe, and then to see what happened Monday afternoon officially, then Tuesday at Kirk's press conference, then Wednesday at his radio show. I mean, this has been an epic news week and an epic week of Iowa football. The present meets the future, and it really shed the past. As you said, I was there at his introductory press conference way back in December 2nd or 3rd or whatever, 1998.
Yep.
You were at the Press Citizen. I was at the Muscatine Journal. I remember Brian Ferentz there. He looked like a big kid. He was like 15 years old. And, people were wondering, all right, which school are you going to go to, when they came to Iowa. And you have all that. And to this point, you're absolutely right. And to watch him walk in pretty brisk, pretty matter of fact when he walked to the podium, but he was not himself. He was not, usually even in adverse situations, and there's one every year.
Yep.
Some are more extreme than others, but he seems to have control and a handle on the situation. And we've seen some really tough ones. But this was the one that I think had him probably the most shaken. And I called him humbled, and not like humbled like I won an award humbled, but like humbled, like almost emasculated. That here's a guy who ran his own kingdom, and basically this week was told, no, we're the ones who make the rule, make the laws, not you. And that was really unusual. And he left things very ambiguous on Tuesday at that press conference. I'm just worried about the next 4 games, and that's it. And then, of course, last night he corrected himself and changed the dynamic of the conversation in a big, big, big way. Seemed to be much more himself. Not a little bit of self-deprecation, but also to kind of calm any kind of fears or ideas or thoughts out there, and said, I'll be back, for a few more years if they'll have me. And, and he kind of joked about Mary Ferentz, she may not be happy, but anyway, for 24 to 48 hours, some of the most compelling and nerve-wracking moments, I think, in Hawkeye football history.
Yeah, and there's so many layers to this, and I know that's kind of cliche and we talk about it, but there are a lot here. I wrote a column on Sunday just because I hadn't written anything in a while, and it was basically like kind of what happened like a day later. My column had like a shelf life of a day, because I was basically like, in summation, program is strong. Something needs to happen at offensive coordinator. You got an interim athletic director. You've got a hands-off president for the most part that we've seen until this, maybe. I don't know. But it's going to be uncomfortable after this season, because conversations are going to have to be had. You've got a head coach who is, you're winning as coach. It's not like a guy you've just hired a couple years ago. You kind of have to massage it. Oof, that went out the window. There was no massage. There was a decision made. It wasn't a discussion. It wasn't, how do we work this out? Which is kind of what I was getting at in my column, that, everybody's going to have to work together here to try to find a solution. And it didn't happen. The solution was the interim AD said, "You're out of here." And I see the benefit of it in, if she was going to make the decision after the season anyway, do it now. It takes the contract, the drive to 325. The players don't have to answer questions about it anymore. It puts the focus back on the season and away from Brian Ferentz, although we still know that the conversation is going to go on. But the decision by Beth Getz, I think that's what including Kirk and Brian, caught them off guard. Yeah. And Kirk was the sole voice this week for the program, no players. So I was fine with that. They've had to answer enough questions about this all season. But now, what is the relationship like now, Scott? And how do we move forward here? And I'll quickly read this quote from Kirk's radio show last night. First of all, I was not trying to intentionally cause a This is referencing one of Scott's self-deprecations, talking about Kirk being self-deprecating. First of all, I was not trying to intentionally cause a celebration for some people that would love to see me go start a stamp collection or go bird watching, whatever. The intent was not to try to steer this thing, or the intent was to try to steer this thing back to what is important right now, which, paraphrasing, is the team. I enjoy coaching. Fortunately, I feel really good. The doctors tell me I'm okay. I hope they're right. I hope to keep doing this for quite a while. I've always loved being here. And he basically said later on that he's going to go until they tell him to sit down or tell him he's out, or he's ready to move on and retire. So that puts us in a spot now of how do we proceed here? What is the relationship like with the athletic director? And I think the decision, what he said yesterday, Scott, I'm sorry, I'm talking a lot, but one is good for recruiting. You don't want negative recruiting. I think that is a part of it. And also, Kirk Ferentz has a contract that lasts quite a while here. If you're saying you're retiring, you lose leverage. Or if you're a fan of Seinfeld, you lose hand, like George Costanza did. So saying you want to be back puts you in a position that if they want you gone, then we're talking no financial negotiations for contract buyouts. So those are the two things that popped in my head when I heard his comments last night, Scott: recruiting and contract.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think he won last night. Yep. I think he won because I don't. And let's look at this kind of from a big picture perspective, because maybe I read it either wrong or too narrowly the first day, and then you think about it a little bit more and you get some more information. But this was not made unilaterally by Beth Getz. She's an interim. She's very smart. Maybe this is the decision and the conclusion she was going to come to, but there are other heavy hitters that have to be involved in this to push out the son of the highest paid employee of the state, who is a certain Hall of Famer, somebody who he's only 2 games shy of tying Bo Schembechler for third in all-time wins in the as a Big Ten coach. So she had to have somebody else involved, and whether what the discussions were, we're still learning details, and a lot of it's mixed with speculation at this point. So I'll kind of phrase it as speculation. And but was it a matter of them meeting, them discussing, and saying, Brian, this is the best for everybody? Would you be willing to resign at the end of the season? And hell no, I'm not going that way. I'll do what I want. Or was it just, this is what's going to happen? And did it come from Barbara Wilson? Well, she was consulted and discussed. So I don't think it was, I remember Sally Mason gave her blessing on firing Tracy Griesbaum. But what it really was Sally Mason told Gary Barta to fire Tracy Griesbaum, and it turned into what we saw, kind of a disaster. That's not quite what we are here, but I think when you remove the emotion of it, it's a smart move, because in a month, Rob, we know what's going to happen. The portal is going to open up. And if you're a receiver at Iowa, or if you're another player, it's open season, man. How many, you talk about tampering, how many people are going to say, you want to play in that offense again? Come on over here. We'll get you some more touches. We'll get you some more yards. And they can't do anything there at Iowa. And you might lose all your guys. And now that removes there's going to be a new offense here. So the guys who maybe genuinely like their teammates and like being at Iowa and want to continue and work hard, it's like, okay, well, we're going to have something different here. That's probably going to be better for me. And then also it signals to potential incoming transfers that, okay, Iowa is going to do something different. Let's give them a little bit bigger look. And then finally, you also know now that Kirk Ferentz will be back. So if you're already a recruit, if you're already an incoming freshman, it's not like, and I'm sure this is probably what signaled it, if nothing else, because for us and the general public, I can't imagine Kirk being that, when he's never really speculated or talked about this stuff in the past. I'm sure the recruits are more like, especially with an early signing day, like, are you going to be here or not? Because I am going somewhere, or I'm going to look around really quick. And so all of that, and again, I'm speculating, but I feel reasonably sure that a lot of that is somewhat accurate. Forced his hand to say that and do that. Now we know things can change, and as you said, maybe it's his way of saying, I'm throwing down the gauntlet. If you're going to, I'm saying I'm staying. If you don't want me to go, you know how much you owe me. But I also noticed, based on the responses and just people in the community, that there isn't a big appetite for Kirk Ferentz to go. It's Brian Ferentz. It's the offense. It's not Kirk Ferentz. So I think it would be, to remove Kirk Ferentz would go against the critical mass, and therefore you would have a real difficult situation in your hands, probably one that we've never seen in our lifetime. And I think it would be much more difficult than the Tom Davis situation.
I think it puts way more pressure on Kirk to fix this offense, Scott, because now there's no more Spencer Petras. There's no more Brian Ferentz. If this thing continues to stink moving forward, the arrows are going to be pointed at the head man.
He's got a couple more years. If let's say that it's like this or just a tad bit better, and it's just kind of what it was under Greg Davis, let's say, then you're probably looking at 2026, maybe looking at a new coach, something like that. And he's kind of angling downward the way Hayden did towards the end, and that's not what you want. But you're right, that was the case this year. The fans have given him the benefit of the doubt and gave everybody the benefit of the doubt. There were about half the people didn't, fell off when Brian became the quarterback's coach. They got rid of Ken O'Keefe, and it's like, well, we're going to go even more into the Ferentz family here. And everybody was pretty upset because they wanted something different then. Then with everybody, with all the issues last year, is like, well, we got a new quarterback and tight end, wide receivers, offensive linemen. Here you are. It's even worse. Now, injuries played a role, but not the complete role. Now it's like, yeah, you're going to have to do something different here. And what is different? And we know one thing about Kirk, and when he hires people, especially at positions like that, almost always there's somebody that he knows and definitely somebody he trusts. And so, where a lot of coaches will go out and get hey, let's get somebody, it doesn't matter if they know him or not, just come in and fix it. Kirk's not that way. Now that he wants that, but is he more apt to elevate John Budmeyer to that role than he is to say, go out and get, a 32-year-old play caller for a MAC school that's had a really good year.
Yeah. And I wonder what the candidate pool is going to be like, because what we know, a lot of people know, we probably know more than most when it comes to the ins and outs of the power structure in the Iowa football program and who has say over what. And Kirk has had a lot of say over the offense. Does he continue to have that say? What type of candidates are going to be willing to work under that umbrella? I mean, it almost seems like, and I think that's what makes John Budmeyer a candidate. To me, I've got nothing against John Budmeyer. I don't know the man personally, but that would not be a good move in my mind. I think you need something different. He's been there. He's been helping coach the quarterback. He's basically been coaching the quarterbacks, let's be honest. I think you have to go outside the building, but I don't know. Again, I wonder how many good candidates they're going to be able to get, knowing – I mean, it's a Big Ten job. I get it. There are going to be people that want it, but are the best candidates going to want it?
And this is what's fascinating, because you can talk to somebody, the name that's getting discussed, and I would be very, very, very surprised if he even became a candidate, let alone Oh no, not him.
I've heard his name a lot. I don't know why he would do it. He certainly knows he doesn't have a job, but I think he's somebody I think that would want to run a program again.
Yeah, well, I think Ryan Grubb is the one I was going to mention. Yeah. Is out at Washington and has an elite offense, and is from
Tell me why he. Okay. I know the Iowa connection.
Okay, here's why Ryan Grubb. Okay, you go there and you fix Iowa's offense, and you go from being dead last in the country to mid-pack in the country. Wow, you're a miracle worker. And then that sets you up for a head coaching job in a lot of places, because if you fix Iowa's offense and take them up to, say, 50 nationally, and let's say that Phil Parker's defense doesn't drop off, Iowa's in the playoff, man. Iowa's in the 12-team playoff, and you're a miracle worker. And that either sets you up to A, replace Kirk Ferentz in a couple of years, or B, get a pretty heavy major job out of that. Now, Paul Chryst is an analyst now at Texas.
That sounds right.
Yeah. He has in the past been a good play caller. It was not the case as much at Wisconsin, but I think there was a lot of other factors there that I would say that distracted him from his play calling. And his nephew is already on the staff as an analyst, and that one would be a fascinating one because, he and obviously Kirk have competed for a long time, both at, when Paul was an assistant under Barry and under Bielema. At Pitt, he was there. And then, of course, at Wisconsin, there's a respect there. He would probably fall under what Kirk likes stylistically. And maybe because there's that respect and he has, at least a resume and a winning percentage that's higher than Kirk's, that he might be able to be left alone. That Kirk might already kind of instruct him on some things, but by and large, the scheme of it won't be there. Now, I would say that you want to also make sure that your offensive coordinator is aligned with the assistant coaches. And if there is an assistant that I would say needs to be looked at, that I've heard a lot of good things about, is Liddell Betts. Different, has never coordinated, obviously, but, has played in the NFL. And maybe that's a job that you say, whoa, that's a little bit high for where you are. I don't know. I mean, somebody's got to elevate sometime, right? I mean, we've seen some really smart young men and do that. And he's been in pro football and he's, coach now. And I think he's worth discussing. I think he's worth being in that conversation. And maybe if not the full OC, maybe run game OC or something like that. I think that's also a thought here, because you look at like Nate Shieldhouse, similar. He's younger, actually, way younger, but similar trajectory. And so if there was anybody internally, I mean, Bud Meyer is going to get a look, no question. But I would also say Liddell Betts probably deserves a look as well. And I expect there to be a little bit of shuffling on the staff either way, because I think the OC should probably be able to, because it's going to be a pass issue, should be able to call who they want at wide receiver coach.
Yes. And I think if you're familiar with the setup, I kind of talked about it before, Scott's points, it's the dynamic, right, of Kirk Ferentz and how he's going to work with the offensive coordinator. How much control does he want? How much is he going to give to the new guy? We've talked about it ad nauseum, Scott. Ken O'Keefe, Greg Davis, Brian Ferentz, all have been the least liked assistant coach during their tenures as Iowa's offensive coordinator. Kirk Ferentz is the constant. What type of flexibility does he have? And does a guy like Ryan Grubb, who I looked it up, he's making 1.45 this year, 1.55 next year, and 1.67 in 2025. So if I'm him, I'm like, yeah, you got to get me at least the $2 million. That puts Phil Parker, like $2.5, $3 million a year? Talking a lot of money here. And for this guy, for somebody like Ryan Grubb, I'm like, why do I need to go to Iowa to fix their offense? I'm flying here. I'll be in the Big Ten next year. I'll get more exposure. If I want a head coaching job, I'm staying here. I'm building what I have rather than taking over that train wreck.
Yeah, no, there's a lot of good points, and I don't know enough about Washington's offense after Michael Penix goes and the wide receiver.
They're recruiting pretty well.
Yeah, and we know what's going to happen. I mean, the Big Ten is different than the Pac-12. I mean, they've got some really good teams, obviously, and most of them are coming to the Big Ten.
Different style.
Different style, and when you're coming. even coming to Iowa City, even with this putrid offense, you got to get ready for that defense.
Yep.
And you got to get ready for the weather that comes with that defense. And we've seen Michael Penix, who had really big numbers coming into 2020, when the year before when he was in Indiana, and get annihilated. So there's, flying cross country, doing all those things. That's going to be a challenge for them. And I'm not in any way saying that they're not prepared for it. They are a very good team, but also, would it surprise you if they are 8-4 next year? Because of the flying and having coming to Iowa City. That's not an easy trip for anybody, especially if Iowa's playing well. It's a lot of times it's a steel cage match. So, but and I'm not saying. If he's interested, I think you talk to him for sure. And I think you now, if I'm him, you ask for the moon in money, and that you are basically running your show. That very, very little involvement from the head coach, except for maybe it's 4th and 1. Do we go for it or punt? That type of thing. And, and potentially even being a candidate in the future. I don't know, head coach in waiting, assistant head coach. That's all worth discussing. Based on how Kirk in his first 3, that Paul Christ might be like the Greg Davis situation. Older guy, has been around, understands, except he's actually got a lot more in common with Kirk than Craig did, because stylistically they can handle that. I think Paul would, he wants to get in the game again. This is his way, because otherwise, would he go to a MAC job?
Yeah.
If you can go to Iowa again, if you can go to Iowa and fix Iowa, then maybe a Power 5 program would take another look at you, like a Pitt, did when they hired him in the first case.
Yeah, he makes a lot of sense. Somebody like Paul Christ, or somebody who's trying to get back in the game, or somebody really with less experience, that maybe he's not at a Power 5 school now, that maybe you can get a head coach at a smaller university that has an offensive background. Or, there are so many candidates out there. It's just a matter of what they're going to be able to attract, and how whoever it is going to mesh and work with Kirk Ferentz. Because I have my doubts about Kirk being hands-off. 25 years of evidence of him not being hands-off. But maybe he looks at this and says, okay, this is it, man. This is my last hurrah. I'm going to hire somebody, let them do it, see if they can get this thing going with this defense and special teams. If I can get somebody to get this offense rolling, I can go out on a really high note. But I also can see him saying, I've done it this way for 25 years. I've won a hell of a lot of football games, and I'm going to continue to do it the way I do it.
And that's the crux here. But it's also, when we talk about football, that's the way he thinks. In other areas, he does adapt, and he has adapted, and in more in the important areas of the world than in football. But I think in this case, that's why you wonder just which path is he going to go down? What makes the most sense for him? And, like when Deion Sanders hired Sean Lewis, he was the head coach at Kent State, ran an up-tempo system, to be his OC. That was a perfect hire, and probably a perfect, move for Sean Lewis. He came here a few years ago when they got beat at Kinnick, but, Kirk, again, he likes people with connections to himself. A George Barnett. Well, he was, knows all the same people. Liddell Betts, he played here. Abdul Hodge, he played here. He fought him to get him here. Even Seth Wallace was a GA. The two that really had no bearings and were Polasek and Kelton Copeland. And Polasek, of course, is now the OC at Wyoming. That would be a really fascinating.
I thought about him. His name popped in my head pretty quickly.
Yeah, and so we'll see what happens there. But I would say Chris, based on everything we've seen in the past, Chris is the one that probably makes the most sense if he doesn't elevate John Budmeyer, just because he fits he knows what Kirk likes, the style. He's not going to try to do something that Kirk's uncomfortable with. Iowa's gone to more gap blocking, which is, of course, what Wisconsin did religiously there. He's going to want to run the ball because that's what he did, and that's what he did as a head coach and as offensive coordinator. And, you know, but not only do they beat Iowa that way a lot of times, they beat Iowa through the air a lot. And so he knows the pressure points. I'm not in any way saying that this is the best hire, but it's the most Kirk Ferentz type hire I could see from that. And then you should probably get a wide receiver coach to go along with him.
Yeah, and I don't know, as you know, we're speculating on the dynamic and how much control Kirk is going to give up. But Scott makes a great point in that Paul Chryst understands the setup coming in. And with a guy who's that much experience and had success, would Kirk be a little bit more open to listening to his suggestions about maybe tweaking some things or changing some things, or how they can collaborate on, what Chris did at Wisconsin and what Kirk does here? Let's collaborate and figure out a way to make this work. Because that's really what we've been looking for 25 years, a collaboration that, can. Iowa's had some good offenses through the years. Let's not act like they've been this bad forever. But we've always wanted just that 1 year where everything kind of clicks. 2002, it clicked. Mm-hmm. That click. That's a long time ago.
Yeah, right.
And there just haven't been enough of those years, Scott. There haven't been enough years where the offense can be relied upon, and not to carry the team, but just be that complement that doesn't hurt the other two.
Exactly. I mean, if you're born during that season, you're now old enough to drink. I mean, no, that's the.
I was old enough to drink then, so old enough to drink.
Me too. Sadly, I was. We're old dudes though now, so I think what we do. What needs to. You look back at what were the things that has made Iowa succeed the last 10 years in different areas, different eras, and why did it work, and how can you make that fit, and then what other areas are you deficient in? I mean, there are a lot of deficiencies, so many that it's hard to really name right now. I mean, some defense you could probably go through. Well, they could be a little bit more stronger, rushing the passer or something like that. But I think with offense right now, there's so many you're going, well, they could be this, and this. I think with Iowa, when they've been most successful under Brian Ferentz were in 2018 through 20. Those were the best years. And in 18, they averaged 31.2. And in 2020, they averaged 31.8 points per game. They had elite offensive linemen and tight ends in 18. And they had a good quarterback. And you wonder how good could Nate Stanley have been with Paul Chryst, who really wanted him to begin with. And then in 20, they ran for 4.6 yards per carry. What is it what elements do those two teams have that Iowa doesn't have now? And I can tell you this, Alaric Jackson, who more I get removed, the more I look at him and go, that is actually one of the most underrated players Iowa's ever had, because he was an ass kicker when it came to the outside zone. And he's starting left tackle for the LA Rams, so let's give him his. He didn't get drafted, and there were reasons, but he got, but he is a starting left tackle in the NFL, and he's an elite level college player, and his blocking on outside zone was fabulous. And then you look back at 18 and Tristan Wirfs, and in 20 you also had Tyler Linderbaum. And then, in 18 you had, TJ Hawkinson, and you had Noah Fant, and you had a quarterback who threw 26 touchdown passes that year. I mean, here's a number for you, Rob. Nate Stanley threw 68 touchdowns in his career. The last 3.5, almost 4 years, 34 total. So, I mean, I think Paul Christ can get more out of the passing game. I think Paul Christ certainly respects the run game, whether it is zone, because they ran zone as well. They weren't just a gap team. And
different offensive line
yeah,
styles, like
yes,
the actual physical look of the offensive lineman.
And Iowa is actually getting a little bit more and more towards there.
Yeah.
So I would say when you've got like Jennings Dunker, you look at him and you're like, okay, that's getting Wisconsin-ish. So overall, I think this is a path that I can see for Iowa.
We'll talk a little bit more about this topic and preview the game and do our picks and all that good stuff. But now is probably a wonderful time to take a commercial break. And before that, we head out for that break, I'm going to let folks know that support for this podcast comes from Systems Unlimited, celebrating 50 years of providing services to people living with disabilities and mental health needs throughout East Central Iowa. A list of their services and upcoming events can be found at sui.org. That is sui.org. Systems Unlimited, doing great work in the community for over half of a century. And we really appreciate their support of this podcast and all the podcasts here on the Hawk Fanatic feed. Let's hear from a few more of our sponsors, and Scott and I will be back on the other side to talk some more Hawkeye football. And we are back on the Hawkeye Hotspot podcast. Rob House, Scott Doctorman. Did you notice what Lisa Bluter wore as her Halloween costume? We talked about it on last week's podcast, didn't we?
Yeah, Barbie. That really, and you know what? That's perfect for Bluter. She's done so many cool things over the years. She was Carol Baskin, that one year from the Tiger King. And, she was Ruth Bluter Ginsburg one year. So, yeah, it's Halloween is a big deal. And the reaction from her players was awesome. So,
yep, they got it going, and they're going to get it going here soon with some real games, as will the men's basketball team. We'll talk a lot more basketball throughout the winter, but this podcast needs to be dedicated to football. There's just too much going on right now. We're in November, 4 games left. Obviously, the changes within the staff and the future and all of that stuff is kind of coming together right now. So very important time for that. It's going to be, it's almost like the decision was made now, almost like, okay, coming off that Minnesota loss, people were down. It's more, I think people were more accepting of the move now. Iowa could very well win these next 4 games. If they're 10-2 and 7-2, can she still make that move?
That's a great question.
Or if they would have won against Minnesota, was that movement? And I saw she was asked about that, and she's really good from a public in the public. She's about as sharp as you can get from a media relations standpoint.
Yeah, she knows what she's doing, and she's good at it. And I think to put her in this position, to empower her to be in this position, you've got to make her the full timer as soon as possible. As soon as, I don't know why they're waiting. I don't understand the complexities of the search or not to have a search, but
I should come and take her.
Oh, I know exactly. I mean, Ohio State's looking for an AD, and if you're Ohio State, you see, because I wrote stories talking to Brands and Bluter and other people that say you can't get all the coaches to agree on anything, but we all agree we love her. And I know Fran feels the same way, and Rick Heller and all these other coaches. And then, oh, by the way, she just made one of the ballsiest decisions you could ever make as an AD, and the head coach still plans to stay. and that was his kid. And that shows some real gumption. And she's been in those meetings. So, that's, you might want to, if you lose her for this, hell's going to pay, because it's really the second time that Barbara Wilson got involved heavily in a football related situation. The first being 8 months ago with the settlement.
Yeah.
I mean, she was heavily involved in that. In fact,
after the fact.
Yeah. Well, and directed it. She ordered the settlement. Just wanted to get it out off the table, which, really, really pissed off the football team that at least wanted their day in court, right? Whether they win or lose, that's what they wanted. And now you look, and she's involved in this, and she's not has not removed the interim tag yet from, so she's having a heavy influence right now in athletics, and she better get her shit to fucking together. Sorry, but otherwise you blow this. I mean, with a new Big Ten coming your way, and football is the cash cow, but all sports, because you look at ahead, how much longer is Fran going to be here? That's, how much longer is Bluter going to be here? And if you're removing somebody that they believe in and they're there for, like Jan Jensen said, if that's your person, how do you show their person that's the one you want to be with? Well, that's why they came back from Croatia at 1 a.m, and they're at the press conference the very next day to support her. So if you say, "Oh no, we're not going to do this," it needs to be done now. So anyway, sorry for swearing.
No, you're good. The quarterback situation, Scott. Deacon Hill is still the guy. Sounds like he's clearly the guy, based on Kirk's comments the other day. There's a clear 1, 2, 3. Deacon being 1, Joe Labus being 2, and Marco Lainez being 3. Not surprised by it, but I just wonder, to me, this is almost connected to the offensive coordinator position, is figuring out this position. It hasn't been figured out now for several years. Granted, Cade McNamara was the guy this year. He gets hurt. That changes the landscape completely. But the offense wasn't succeeding with him at the helm. So they need to do something with this position, but I don't know if they can do anything for the rest of this season, Scott. They really just need the quarterback not to do what he did against Minnesota, and that's turn the ball over 3 times.
You would hope, and I asked Kirk, I said, I understand about negative plays, but but what can the quarterback do positively for you? And then he went right to negative plays. Well, the first thing is you don't want to get beat yourself. Well, yeah, but you can't, you're operating from a zero perspective, zero sum. It's not about, scoring points. It's about preventing the other team from scoring points. But you don't have 2 defensive units and a special teams unit.
And let's face it, Scott, that offense had a chance to win that Minnesota game.
Yes.
In the last few minutes, and just failed miserably again.
No, exactly. And I mean, we could pan, and we will, the call against Cooper DeJean all we want. But I also don't sit there and go, Iowa should have won that game, because Iowa had a chance and Iowa blew it. And whether it was Deacon Hill's fault, Brian Ferentz's fault, it was everybody's fault collectively. And they didn't do it. And that's, but that's the offense that we've seen now over and over and over again. How do you get, I made the ketchup analogy, in 3 straight years. And I did it the other day. I said, what more can you get from this? And he said 2 years ago was about squeezing the last bottle. It drops out. Last year was like a glass bottle in a diner, and you're trying to use the knife and getting it down there. Now you're just going in the trash can looking for empty packets, trying to get a little juice, of offense. And that's kind of where they are right now, Rob. It's you've got to make sure he makes the makeables, but you have to put him in position to make makeables, and then he has to do it. And we saw some drops, but we've also seen some, oh my God, how can you throw the ball like that? The guy wasn't even looking, and maybe that's the receiver's fault. I think in most of those situations it was the quarterback's fault. Like he gets happy feet now, and you complete 37% of your passes. That's the number you need to know, and that's really the only one that matters at this point.
Yeah, I wonder if he struggles this week, if a change is made at all going forward. I mean, in fairness to Deacon Hill, he's not ready to play. He really isn't. He hasn't been developed enough. He was heading to Fordham from Wisconsin, and before Iowa swooped in because they wanted a backup quarterback because they weren't confident in Carson May and Joe Labus.
Mm-hmm.
So now you got another guy. You move him ahead of those two guys. May leaves. Labus is still here. He's the guy you've been developing, right?
Mm-hmm.
He's the guy that should be developed and should be ready to play right now. And I know he's missed time with injury during the offseason, but I mean, that's part of this equation too. Quarterback development. What are we doing here? With Spencer Petras and Alex Padilla and Carson May and Joe Labus. When are we going to get to a point where the quarterback is developed?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, Spencer was limited. There's a lot of positives about Spencer, but his play was very inconsistent.
And I wonder how much is that on him and how much is that on coaching development? It's probably some of both, right?
Yeah, it is. Because, I'm not going to fault his, what he tried to do. I mean, he'd go to Tony Rassiopi and work on fundamentals all the time. Yep. He'd spend his spring break there. He would go in the summer. He would do whatever it took to try to get better. And then he'd always revert back. And I don't know that that's necessarily an Iowa problem on that, because, after a while, you've really got to get good at it. But he had an incredible arm, and his brain power for football is out of this world. In fact, if Brian walked, I would probably say you maybe make him the offensive coordinator. I wouldn't be opposed to that.
Or the quarterback coach.
Yeah, absolutely. It'd be like Varsity Blues. He'd be like Lance Harbor. And, hook and ladder. But you look at all those guys. You're right. I mean, other than Nate Stanley, there hasn't been any kind of development in almost a decade.
Tyler Wiggers?
Wiggers, yeah, he went to East, and he lost a battle.
Yeah, a competition with Stanley.
And that made sense. And then, but other ones.
That takes us back to Beathard, right? Have we gotten everybody from back to Beathard?
Well,
Stanley, Wiggers, May.
Well, you got guys going back there like Ryan Boyle and and Cook and
Drew Cook,
and not they left and were a little bit better, but it's just what's his name, Peyton Mansell.
Yeah, another one.
Yeah, and and quarterbacks usually are you get hit on 1 out of 3 or so, because one may not be very good and one transfers and then one sticks. That's usually about the way it goes. And so that's why they went to the portal. But yeah, they haven't developed them. And who's the quarterback's coach now? That's where a lot of this begins. And Joe Labus, for whatever reason, they don't like it. They don't like it. And
we forgot about Deuce.
Oh,
how could we forget about Deuce? He was the savior.
Yes, he was the big one. He was the one that should be here now, right?
He's not doing anything. He's got a lot of free time on his hands.
Yeah, he's like 4th string at Kentucky. But they misidentified on all of those. I mean, if Deuce is at Kentucky and he's not even second team, then
no, they recruited Leary over him.
Yeah.
And we're like, we're not going with this guy. Let's pay a bunch of money for the guy from NC State.
Right. And again, you look at all these guys, and the common element is they're not in the NFL. They're not NFL quarterbacks. And so, Cade was supposed to be that guy, and he struggled early on. And I think when you look at the future, Rob, Kincaid, I'm not going to call him injury prone, but he's had a lot of injuries. And you're talking about knee surgery ending his 2022 season, didn't get a practice in the spring, then injures his quad in 2023, then an ACL in 2023, and he's got to come back from that. He's going to miss the spring. He's not going to be able to practice in the spring.
And what percentage of health is he going to be when the season rolls around?
Well, exactly. Is he going to be what he was limited wise? And
is he going to be able to move even less?
Yeah. And, that's why, I've been kind of a proponent now of you got to this point in the season and it's obvious you're not going to take Labus. Why not just Lainez? Because that actually helps you for next year. Because let's say he gets in, he can play poorly and still be playing better than Deacon Hill. Although Kirk did take exception to that when Chad said something about him. Are they just that bad? He used that term, and he's right though. But,
there's ways to frame it, but that is accurate.
Yeah, right. Kirk didn't like that part, but you look at him and you're like, I don't know.
So, would you get a quarterback out of the portal? I would too.
But how?
I know, that's the thing. The guy who started this year is back next year, and he'll be the number 2, you would think. And the guy who started the season as a starter will be back as the starter.
Yeah.
And then you've got a redshirt freshman in Marco. And then if Reeser signs in December, those are your quarterbacks. If you're in the portal, what are you gonna be able to attract?
Well, are you gonna attract somebody just like Deacon Hill? That's pretty much it. Somebody just takes snaps in the spring. Because Lavis is out of here. There's no way. If we did the same thing on a napkin like we did at the Pinstripe Bowl that year, Rob, I would put him like he'd be like John Hancock on the Declaration of Independence, as far as who's out of here.
Yeah, I would. I think there's the odds at the book, at the books for Joey Lavis's exit. You're not going to get much value there if you're looking to put some money down. But the quarterback position, the coaching of the quarterbacks moving forward is huge. Obviously, the offensive coordinator and how that's is the offensive coordinator the quarterback coach. You're hiring somebody separate to be the quarterback coach. Who knows how this comes together, but. Need to figure out that position, need to figure out wide receiver, as Scott said earlier. That's just not working. And then I think the offensive line is moving in the right direction, but we're going to need some more progress there too.
Yeah, without question. I think among the things I saw there, Rob, after looking it up, watching the game again, a couple of times, was I really thought that they are in making strides, and some of the issues I saw even against Minnesota was not a them problem; it was a schematic issue, and that was that a lot of those plays they had their guys blocked. I mean, you can't tell a lineman to block 2 guys. It just doesn't happen that way unless you're like, Tristan Wirfs or something. But, but what they were doing is they were throwing numbers at the running game. They knew, they understood. Let's slam the running game and make them beat us through the air because we don't think this quarterback can complete a pass. And they're pretty much right on that. So I think they're making okay moves. The one thing is, we talked about the teams of the past. There is no Alaric Jackson. There is no Tristan Wirfs on the edge.
Linderbaum, sure.
They got some good players. I think they got some developing players. Even guys like Connor Colby and Jennings Dunker, I think are moving in the right direction. I think Logan Jones is a good player. But they're more in the good guy territory, not first team all Big Ten, Outland Trophy finalist category.
Yeah, and then still have the Caden Proctor hole that was left. How might that have changed things? We'll never know. But that is down the river and far away. But what is not down the river and far away, Scott, is a game at Wrigley Field on Saturday where both teams will be on the same sideline. Kirk did not seem impressed with the setup when he talked about it the other day. And logistically, a baseball stadium is going to cause some issues compared to a stadium that is made for multi-purpose or football. So we'll see how that goes. The weather shouldn't be much of a factor Saturday. These teams combined in Big Ten play, Scott, 34 points a game. Iowa, I believe, is 14-2 or 14-8 in Big Ten play, Big Ten games only. And Northwestern is obviously, do the math, 20-ish, yeah. So points should be at a premium here. Iowa's the better team, I think, but it's just a weird it's going to be a weird November, I think, just with the way the West is. I think it's just going to be wild. We can all sit here and predict what we think is going to happen, but just I think it's going to be silly season in November with this division.
Yeah, I mean, you look at you've got 4 teams tied with 1 record, and then you have Northwestern, who's just a game back. So
speaking of interims, that guy should get the head coaching job.
Yeah, that's been a remarkable. Right now, I mean, you look at everything, he might be my coach of the year. Ryan Day would probably be it if they beat Michigan and they go undefeated, but I think Braun would be a close second right now, just because I didn't expect them to do anything other than maybe beat Howard and somebody like they played one of the MAC schools or something like that, UTEP or something. But man, they've done a nice job, and they did a nice
Minnesota.
Job. Yeah,
and Iowa didn't. So that tells you right there. If you're thinking they're just going to roll the ball out Saturday and win,
Yep, I think they had 399 yards that day, and that was so that was pretty significant. Iowa had 127. So they can move the ball, and Brendan Sullivan has gotten better. He played really well against Maryland. Now Maryland's defense is not very good. No. So that is a major issue, but overall, it's something to behold. So I think this, but I'm excited about Wrigley Field, man. This was something that at the beginning of the year, it just seems like, Rob, that we haven't allowed, we media, everybody, fans, whatever, there has not been a chance to get excited about football. There's always been something that's sidetracked this program in the last 9 months, whether it was the drive for 325 or Brian's coming back, then it's the drive for 325, then it's the settlement that went through, and then it's you get to okay, but they're getting receivers, and then it's the gambling investigation, and then it's the offense being pathetic again, and now you got this. It's like, damn, they're playing at Wrigley, man. That's pretty cool. I mean, just being a Cubs and a Bears fan, because the Bears played there till 71, and one thing I did look up, I thought that was really awesome. I went through all these box scores from the 60s and early 70s. The last punt return at Wrigley Field was on Gale Sayers' the 6th touchdown against the 49ers in 65. So maybe Cooper DeJean could do some magic there too.
Maybe he'll do something on offense. Who knows? We'll get wild at Wrigley. Northwestern's defense, Scott, allowing 28.6 points per game in conference play. That's 10th in the league. Iowa's 4th at 15.8, and a lot of that is skewed because of the Penn State game. Mm-hmm. Iowa lost at Penn State 31-0. Northwestern lost to Penn State 41-13 in Evanston earlier this year, so there's a common opponent on that one. I was familiar with Brendan Sullivan. Saw him last year, sacked him, 6-7 times? Something like that in Kinnick Stadium. So they finally they've got a quarterback they're familiar with, and I would expect Northwestern to not have as much success against Iowa's defense as it did against Minnesota. That's my prediction for this week.
Yeah,
going out on a limb.
Yeah, going out on a limb. And I don't think they'll play like they did against Maryland either. I mean, Maryland's defense is not good. But you want to hear another interesting little stat is none of the coaches would have hit in the West Division have hit the drive for 325. They all average less than 25 points per game. So that's fascinating in its own right. But what I did see of him last week was he's confident, poised. He made plays. He looked like a typical Northwestern quarterback. Now that very well could be Maryland's defense. Maryland is the same type of team every year. They're very talented. they go out in September and roll through all these teams, and they beat another Power Five, and everybody's like, "Oh, it's finally the year!" And then, they're getting all these plaudits, and next thing you know, it's like, no,
It's typical Maryland season.
Yeah. And then, by the way, today we find out the schedule for 2024 at 3:00. So it'll be a little bit busy day.
Yeah, it's they time that stuff to come after we do a podcast. That's kind of the golden rule of news flow is for information to come out as soon as we're done with this podcast.
Yeah. Well, the one thing is with this, Rob, is we don't have time to talk about that thing next year. We got enough to worry about right now. We'll worry about the schedule next year. I mean, I have messed around with some numbers.
We know who they play already. It's just a matter of where when, right?
Yeah.
Really? What days?
Yeah, exactly.
Because we won't have times either.
No, probably, and we won't have times, and we won't have, that doesn't come till like May. But the ADs were just like, we need a schedule, because for travel and all that kind of stuff, and get organized for homecomings and all that stuff. I didn't expect it to come today. I did talk to Kerry Kenny with the Big Ten yesterday about another topic, and he said very sooner than later. But and I'll probably talk to him later today about this. But I did not expect him to be today. So.
Well, in conclusion, in wrapping up this football talk before we get to our picks, I think it's fair to say the Iowa football program is at another crossroads. And when you have a head coach that's here for 25 years, you see different crossroads, whether it's the initial rebuilding of the program or, the end of 06 into 07 stretch or the end of 2014. It feels, Scott, like we're kind of back in that area again where there's decisions to be made, and this is going to be an active off season.
No question, because this is really the last 0.0 of the Ferentz era. I mean, he's not going to be coaching for 10 more years. Maybe 3 or 4, maybe 5, but this is the last stanza of that era. Last Costanza there. But no,
does he go out on a high note?
Yeah, I don't know.
Goodbye, everybody.
Yeah,
stands a high note.
Yeah, exactly. Well, but every single time that we thought that, okay, this is just it's the downturn, things are going to get bad, that he's found a way, and through the adversity. And
it's the Undertaker meme.
Yeah. I mean,
Kirk.
He's like Rasputin over there. You try to kill him, you try to drown him, you take away his kid, and all he does is go out and win bowl games and win 10 games and do all that kind of stuff. So,
one thing I caught the other day in the press conference, Scott, that I forgot to bring up with you. Did you catch? And I kind of heard this too. But did you kind of catch him talking about Brian signing that amended contract and that being his best option? That was kind of interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I can say it now. When I talked to Brian in the summer, and we talked a lot off the record, he was like, "Well, I don't want to sign it," and then Barta was like, "Well, it's either this or be terminated."
Yep.
And that was really the choice. And so, yeah.
And that pretty much killed the Ferentz Barta relationship.
Right.
Which is why I wonder how this relationship with Getz, how it's starting, where it goes from here, which I think is a fair observation.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's really it's just really interesting, because how do they go forward? How much involvement does Kirk believe it was? Was it unilateral? Was it Beth's decision and Barbara Wilson just backed her up? Or, was it, hey, this had really heavy influence by Jessup, by the regents, by donors? I'm just relaying this, or, I'm sure she had to own some of it, but either way. And then you could, even if you're her, I mean, they've scored 5 touchdowns in 5 Big Ten games, offensive touchdowns.
That's not good.
That's terrible.
That's not good.
And you look at how many they've given up in the last 4 games of Big Ten play, not counting the Penn State game, but the last 4, they've given up 2 touchdowns and 1 on offense, 2 on defense. So that's just, you're really, and you almost relied on Cooper DeJean saving the day yet again. So I don't know. Kirk was back to being normal, I guess, last night. I think he'll probably be more bunkered down than even more than normal this year, which he's been very bunkered in for a while. I expect that to be the case the rest of the season, but he, I don't know. I don't know how much he's going to put on Beth for this, because Gary's the one who kind of started it.
Yeah, and like you say, she didn't make this decision by herself. Far from it. So that's publicly that she was able to carry out the order, so to speak, is impressive, and we'll see where it goes from here. Let's go to the picks, Scott. I hesitate to do this because I don't think I did very well last week.
Yeah, neither one of us did. We both went 2-3 last week. The only one we got right was Nebraska, because Penn State didn't cover at 31.5.
No,
I got Northwestern plus 13.5 against Maryland. You took Maryland, but then I took Michigan State. You took Minnesota, and then we both whiffed by a half point on Ohio State, Wisconsin.
The hook has gotten us a couple times this year.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I did the week before too. I mean, we were the Iowa game against Minnesota. If that touchdown counts, we win. So. But this week, right now, I'm 45-31-6, and you're 40-36-1. So
I'll take it.
Yeah,
it's over 500.
Over 500 when you come into betting, that's not bad. So
nope.
All right, let's look at the first game this week. Wisconsin at Indiana. The Badgers are 8.5-point favorites on the road at Indiana, and this was a wild game. I'm going to go with Indiana in the 8.5. I don't know. I mean, they played well last week, I thought, but Indiana didn't play poorly against Ohio State earlier in the year. So I'm gonna take the Hoosiers. I think Wisconsin wins, but I think it's give me the 8.5.
That's a big number, and I don't like giving up that many points, but I think Wisconsin is clearly the better team. Some pause with it being at Indiana, some pause with the hook, but I'm going to take Wisconsin.
Yeah, I mean, I guess for road environments, it's not exactly like going the other way around.
Unless you go over to Assembly Hall.
Yeah, then it's different. Even that. Remember all those years though when Tom Crean was playing against Bo Ryan, and Bo Ryan won like 10 games in a row or something.
I remember one year at Memorial Stadium, Iowa, during the Iowa game, obviously they had like a inter squad scrimmage for basketball, and it started like right after the football game, and Iowa was winning so decisively that a bunch of the people left so they could get seats over at Assembly Hall for an exhibition basketball game.
It's amazing how different the cultures are.
Yeah,
there, and Purdue's the same way, and Illinois is really close too to that. But Indiana especially, like you go to Big Ten media days. I remember like Zach Osterman or somebody would, oh man, they just got to commit. I got to.
Yeah.
And so then, they would be worrying about that rather than writing their media day football story. And then you go to basketball media days and it's like Ohio State or Nebraska as far as, people who were there. But this one is maybe as intriguing as any game of the weekend. And that's Nebraska at Michigan State. Nebraska 5.5. And the over-under isn't real big either, 35.5.
Indiana and Michigan State are both 0-5 in league, so they both have a chance to get their first wins at home this week as home dogs.
Yeah, exactly. I think this could be close. Obviously, I think it'll be close, but I'm going to go with Nebraska. I think they're starting to I don't know that they're good, but I just think that they may be better than the bad. Michigan State's got a good players, but this is dead ship. This is already hit the iceberg.
Yeah, same kind of the same philosophy for me as with the Indiana game. I think Indiana and Michigan State are just kind of playing it out, and Wisconsin and Nebraska are playing for something.
Yeah.
That can go either way, the pressure. But I think I'm going with Nebraska as the better team, and I don't think that Michigan State has anything left in the tank.
Yeah.
Which means they'll win by 3 touchdowns.
You never know. It's going to be that one game where they kind of peer up. But
Nebraska's defense is just really impressive. And I think with Michigan State's offense, that's where the game will be won.
Yeah, there'll be some turnovers. They'll probably return them. It'll be like 24-6 and like 2 touchdowns by their defense. And then they're going to be like, wow, this is like Iowa. And then they'll come after me just for mentioning that. But,
your relationship with the Nebraska fans is special.
You can call it that, I suppose. Yeah, they for whatever.
It's entertaining. I'm entertained by it when I do. I miss this week's entertainment with you wrestling with those Husker fans.
I don't know what happened. I mean, it was the weirdest thing, Rob. It was the volleyball match. Iowa's volleyball match. You got first time ever a sellout here, first time, and so I said it's the Caitlin Clark effect in reverse. You know, number 1 Nebraska.
Yep, I get it. Perfectly sane take.
Oh, no, you're an idiot. You're an effing. I even threw out the Morehouse eat shit out of somebody. You know?
Man, when I'm busy doing state volleyball, I miss a lot of good stuff on the island.
Yeah, man. Yeah, and you know, my wife was mad at me. You know, like, hey, you got to stop that. And I'm like, yeah. I'm like sitting there, you know, trying to write my story about Kirk Ferentz, and all of a sudden it's like this tidal wave, this red wave from the West is engulfing me.
It almost seems like when you tweet anything about them, the bat signal is lit, and they just kind of rally to attack you.
Yeah, I don't know, man. It's like the mosquitoes when I'm out on the patio. But let's get Ohio State at Rutgers 18.5, which sounds kind of low, but then you realize Rutgers is 6-2, but the over under isn't real high either at 42.5. I think this could be a really tough, hard fought game. I'm still going to go with Ohio State, but that is kind of a tough number because Rutgers is a lot better than they have been, certainly in the past.
Yeah, and the thing you think of, Scott, in the past is with Ohio State's offense, you're like, oh, they'll cover up that number, no problem. Yeah. In this game, you've got a pretty good Rutgers defense against a above average Ohio State. I would. That was an idiot statement by me. They're always above average, but not where it's been in the past. They're more defensive oriented too, which would mean that 18.5 is attractive. I'll take Ohio State.
Yeah, right.
After all that.
See, I'm looking at like 31-10.
Yeah.
You know, and something
you
like
watch that hook's going to get us in one of these games.
Yeah.
We got 8.5, 5.5, and 18.5.
Yeah,
we're going to get hooked by one of those.
There's a couple more coming too. The fourth of 5 visitor favorites. Penn State at Maryland. Penn State's minus 11.5. The number is 50.5. Even though Penn State didn't cover last week, I think they might cover this week. Maryland looked kind of stunned against Northwestern. Now, do they flex their rivalry muscals and fight, or does
these teams do not like each other?
I know.
For those out here that don't follow the East Coast wars,
yes.
These programs do not like each other.
Right. And Penn State did not play well against Indiana, but is that a trend or is that that's a wake-up call?
Yeah.
Because next week, I think it is next week they play Michigan. So I'm going to go with Penn State. I think Penn State will cover. I was not impressed at all with the way Maryland has been playing the last few weeks.
I'm with you. I'm getting off the Maryland train. I think it's headed down the wrong path again, the wrong tracks again, as it does this time. Pretty much every November they go into the slide. So I'm going to take PSU as well.
Yeah. They've lost 3 straight. So I think this is what's going to happen. Illinois at Minnesota. This is our first home favorite. but it's only by 3 points for Minnesota, 41.5. Illinois is playing a little bit better, I think, overall, but they're still 1-4 in the Big Ten, 3-5. They can't afford. This is a must-win game, I think, for them. But for Minnesota, it's a stay even game. And I think last week was an interesting situation with PJ because most times they want people to put the wins or the losses in the rearview mirror after 24 hours. He's like, no, live in it, enjoy it. And it really worked for them against Michigan State. And I kind of think that they're going to win again that way. I think they're feeling themselves, and Illinois is still trying, even though they've got some pieces that are good, they just haven't really gotten any kind of on the ground yet. So I'm going to go with Minnesota.
What's the number here, Scott? I'm sorry.
-3 for the Gophers.
This is in Champaign?
No, this is in Minneapolis. Yeah.
Yeah. That seems like too easy of a number. Okay. I'll take Minnesota -3. That reminds me of the Nebraska game last week that I liked a lot. And I didn't use when that happens. Sometimes I shy away because I'm like, I like this too much. I'm not going to, I should have bet on it. But anyway, we'll see if I do the same with Minnesota against Illinois this week. Illinois is my thorn in my side.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Well, I think we get in that with, and I always say the NCAA tournament 5-12.
Yeah,
you could see it both ways, and it's like, well, but and then you pick the wrong one because you're going back and forth, and then somebody like your wife's in a pool and goes, oh, I like that one just because I like the name of it or something.
Mascot.
Yeah, the mascot choice or whatever. Gonzaga, that's a funny name. I think they'll be pretty good. The night game on NBC, and maybe before the year, this might not have been a bad choice, but it certainly isn't in the same breath as it was a year ago in December, and that's Purdue at Michigan. Michigan is a 31.5-point favorite, and the over-under is 48.5. Michigan's got a lot of controversy here, but I don't know that Purdue can really stand up to them. I mean, Purdue lost at home 41-7, I think it was, to Ohio State. I'm still going to go with Michigan at home. I think that they're kind of embracing this us against the world, and Purdue is tied for last in the West, and I don't see them putting up much resistance this year.
No, I think Michigan's probably rallied around the sign stealing scandal. Mm-hmm. I don't know what comes of it, but I sense that they've stayed together through this. And Purdue stinks. So throw the 31.5.
All right. Now, the game we're covering, me in person, and you from your couch, but it's a lovely couch, more comfortable probably than the chairs and Wrigley.
Or the sideline at Wrigley with the wind blowing in my face while I'm taking photos.
Exactly. 5.5 was the last number I saw. Rob, maybe you have a better number.
I saw 5 last night, Scott, but 5.5 is fine.
Oh, okay. And it opened at circa at 29.5. I don't know if it's the one that I have here is 30.5. I don't know if that matters, but
what did I see last night? I looked at Bet Rivers last night, and let's see what I got here. Here we go. Iowa was 5-point favorite last night at Bet Rivers. 31 was the total. Okay. Some trends for folks out there for this game. The total has gone over in 5 of Northwestern's last 7 games. The total has gone under in 4 of Iowa's last 5 games. The Wildcats are 4-15 straight up in their last 19 games. The Hawkeyes are 14-1 straight up in their last 15 games played in November.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the Nebraska game was the only one that didn't come back. So, Rob, this is a series that has always baffled me to try to pick a winner. Usually when Northwestern's good or they just snake bite, they bite Iowa at the times where you're just like, how did that happen? And they do it over and over and over and over and over again. However, I kind of feel like we've been here before with Iowa too. And this is that, okay, you're in November and it's the adversity and we're going to rally around the flag and we're going to play good football. And I like Iowa in this one. I think I like Iowa to cover. and to win outright and to do everything that Iowa traditionally does in not maybe dominant fashion, but convincing fashion.
It's going to be a slog. It's going
Yeah.
to be a 4-quarter game, and I'll figure out some more cliches at some point to throw at this game. I'm with you. I'm going to take Iowa. I think Iowa wins 17-9. So an 8-point cushion there and the under. But yeah, I'm with you. I've seen too many of these movies with Iowa Northwestern to have any sense of confidence in my pick and what I think is going to happen, because oftentimes we don't predict what's going to happen in this game. Iowa's been better recently. Last year was domination. But we'll see. I think a key is going to be kind of what Iowa did last year, and that's get after Sullivan. If they can get after him, maybe create some turnovers, help the offense a little bit, I think that's what's going to go down.
Yeah, because last week, last game, they didn't create any turnovers. They had a really good game. Mm-hmm. I mean, they didn't allow any touchdowns. You'd think usually that's enough to win. For Iowa, second year in a row, you've lost a game against a divisional rival by not, giving because you didn't even give them up a touchdown. They still won. But, the last 3 games combined, they've had 10 sacks. So they're starting to get better at getting after the quarterback. They did need some rest. They have it. It's unfortunate Noah Shannon's not back yet. Hopefully next week should be the week because they meet again on Wednesday, and therefore I think that's probably when that'll all take place. But no, I haven't figured out what score I want to use yet. I'm still dallying. I mean, I could see it anywhere from.
This could definitely be like a scorigami game where you have something weird like 18-15.
Yeah. 11-5 at Wrigley, Yeah.
Let's go to the bullpen.
Yeah. Hey, I think Iowa fans would cheer for that one. They have Dusty Baker walk out there and grab Deacon Hill.
All right, folks. I think we've exhausted everything we can talk about here on this podcast for this week. Scott and I will be back next week on the Hotspot podcast. So please join us then. Have a great weekend. If you're going to Wrigley, be safe, stay out of trouble, bundle up, and have a good trip. And we'll talk more again about other sports as we move forward here. This was just a week where I think we really needed to stick to football just because of everything that's going on. But we'll expand next week and going forward with some more basketball, wrestling, things like that. So stay tuned for that. Scott, have a good trip to Chicago. Say hi to everybody there for me. I will be, as you said, on my couch watching the game, and we'll have a podcast either after the game or the next morning with Jovan Johnson and Jordan Canzeri recapping the action.
Goodbye, Scott.
I didn't say goodbye, Scott. You're not allowed to say that yet. That's 15 yards and a loss of down. All right. Say goodbye, Scott.
I can't remember if it's invalid. Goodbye, Scott. Goodbye, Scott.